everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree. Hi if you're new here, or hey, you've been here before. Thank you for joining me today. Even though I'm holding a cup, I'm not actually doing a discussion video. I'm just enjoying some tea as I'm about to react to some of my old college advice. So, as some of you know, I've mentioned this before on my channel, but I have done plenty of writing courses when I was in undergraduate for my 4 years there, and a lot of that, you know, it's going on 10 years now. I started college in 2010, so some of this information I do feel could be dated, and even though I don't know quite when I got this information, I had found it while digging through some of my stuff and really trying to downsize because when I relieve stress, I get rid of my things. So I was cleaning one day and I found this advanced creative writing layout for kind of how to be an effective writer, I suppose. And it kind of, I read through it briefly and it struck me as like, this would be interesting to react to because I'm not sure if I agree with all of it. So I figured, why not make a video and share it with you guys where I am going to react to an old college writing course. So to preface, this sheet is not cited. I don't remember, off the top of my head, I can't remember which professor this actually was from, but it does say advanced writing course, and I took creative writing and then advanced creative writing, so I'm assuming it is from the latter class, which I took a little bit later, like either my sophomore or junior year, I'm pretty sure. And if I remember correctly, it was a older white gentleman who taught this course. Very much like rooted in the old ways, very nice guy, but firm believer in what he believed in. So I'm going to read off some of these. There are 12 pieces of advice and this was given as our like he gave this to us on the first day to say like, if you follow this, you'll be a good writer. So I'm going to react to it. Okay, so the first one on here says, write out of your own experience, your own town or city, your block, your high school, your team, your swimming pool, etc. Do not write from the point of view of a person 40 or 50 years old unless you happen to be that old. Do not write about a city if you have grown up on a farm. Huh. Okay, so to be honest, I don't agree with this advice. I think when I'm looking at writing, the way that we grow as writers is when we challenge ourselves. And in order to be a good writer, I think you kind of have to be able to challenge this. I mean, I'm just thinking of some of like, you know, literary fiction, like this first line would like rule out historical fiction and some literary fiction and a lot of things that people write about because they don't experience it. Like there's tons and tons of work of historical fiction, but according to this, like I don't think that this would be appropriate because you have never lived in that period. And like I said, I'm challenging that because I don't think that's true. I think when you're starting out as a writer, and my own experience as well, when I was in 5th grade, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, writing my little heart out, that's where I started. I started with the things that I knew. I also mimicked a lot. So I mentioned this. I loved Shel Silverstein as a kid, and I would write my own poems. Like, essentially, it was plagiarizing when I was in 5th grade, but I would like, oh, I really like this poem, so I'm gonna make my own version. And it would be different, but it would be obviously like the same thing, because that's how I was learning. And I would write from my own experiences. So I wrote about, you know, going to like Valentine's Day parties and having sleepovers and like things like that, because that is where I knew. Because that is what I knew. So there's definitely validity when you're younger or you're first starting out. If you're writing from what you know, then yeah, that's going to give you a lot of credibility. And sure, even to me to this day, you know, like, you know, writing about like sexuality and mental health, like that is something that I know, and I know I can convey it relatively well on a paper, but also that doesn't guarantee that I'm going to be a good writer for that anyway. And then too, we wouldn't have fantasy and like all these other genres that do so well if we were just writing with work we're comfortable with. I'm particularly thinking like Taylor Jenkins Reid writes amazing books, and like she had like her one protagonist in The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was 80 years old. Taylor Jenkins Reid is not that old, but the book was phenomenal. She didn't need to be 80 years old in order to write that book. You have other people, you have tons and tons of adults who write young adult let alone. I mean, sure, you were that age once before, but times change, and as the years change, like, if you're not up with the times, like, it's going to be very clear that you're an older person writing a young adult novel. So I think partially, like, you can start there and you can grow, but at the end of the day, you still need to do research in order to be an effective writer. Like, I can't just sit down and start writing about depression if I know nothing about depression. It's going to be very obvious if that's the case. So yeah, I think that first point I would not agree with already. And I think that you can certainly write out of your realm if you just do the research that you need. The second one is be as specific as you can. Name things. If you have to refer to a tree, refer to it by name. Name streets, name stores, name cars, etc. This is why it's valuable to write about your own place. And again, as I've written tons and tons of stories, and I've tried to write novels, and I think this is something that you're taught as a young writer because you want to get into the habit of being specific. And that's partially due to wanting to be descriptive, which is where I think the difference is. When you're trying to be descriptive, when you're younger, you kind of start out by getting that specific. Like, there was a very tall, big, brown oak tree in the yard 500 feet away, and it was overlooking, the 42nd Street. That kind of specific. However, I think if you repetitively do this in books, you start to realize really soon that, and it kind of gets annoying. Now, not everything, like, I definitely think you can name drop and be specific with things and get away with it, but it's definitely like there's a time and place. So I think, again, this would be better to be described as be descriptive, and maybe there's another one on this list, but I don't think you have to be specific all the time unless there's a reason to be specific. For instance, if you are writing a murder mystery and you have, the repetitive of like 42nd Street, that might be a clue that something's going to happen on 42nd Street, or 42nd Street is important. But that's the problem. If you start to name things and be too specific, readers, they're smart. They're going to pick up on that, and they're going to wonder, like, hey, was this something that should come back? And if it doesn't, or it has no significance, they're going to be kind of like, what? So, again, I think it's important, depending on what tone you want to set, and, like, what significance certain specificity has in your novel. But I don't think it's, like, an end-all, be-all. I don't think you always have to be specific as long as you're descriptive. Number 3 is use short words and short sentences. If you can say it in 2 words, say it in 2, not 5. So this one, I do somewhat agree with. I do think especially when you're editing, so I'm in the editing phases right now, and cutting down your word count, this is where this one becomes super effective. When you're trying, we had a massive beast at one point when I was co-writing my novel, and we had like 180,000 words. We needed to trim that bad boy down completely because it was too much. We were not going to get a publishing deal for that. And part of it, when we assessed a lot and there was a lot of changes, but when we split the book in half and then went back to edit the first part of it, a lot of the small things was, okay, you know what, we're too repetitive, or it's just too wordy for the sentence. And that's kind of like line editing. So there is validity to this where you do want to be short and sweet sometimes, but there are still novels out there, and there are ways of wording things where a little bit lengthier novels, especially if you're mixing it up, flows much better. If your work tends to be like long ass paragraphs of like run-on sentences, then it could be a little overwhelming for the readers, and there's no natural stopping point. So that's why being short and sweet, especially having those mixture of sentences, works really well in writing. However, again, if you have a point for something, like I'm thinking of, if someone is having like a panic attack and their thoughts are going like over and over and over and over and over again, and you want the reader to kind of pick up this heightened sense, then you might end up having a true run-on sentence and a run-on like stream of consciousness thought for this character, because that's the effect. So again, you just kind of have to be aware of what you're doing and your stylistic choices in order for this to be true, this statement. Overall, again, I think short sentences works, but it really depends on what you want to do. If you're trying to be descriptive, you could probably end up getting away with more words in a sentence to be descriptive and then follow it up with a shorter sentence. It's all about the flow at the end of the day. I love number 4. Number 4 says, do not be pretentious, abstract, exhibitionist, or dishonest. Sure. I love this one because, yes, I think a lot of people, and you'll see it so often when we read things, and it's so easy to be like, the book sounds pretentious. But it's hard to say, you know, if that's your style, because I think I can look at a book and say it's pretentious, and someone else can say, no, I really liked it. It was very poignant and, you know, to the point, and I loved the way that she talked about things. And that's very subjective. So I do think number 4, it's so hard to tell this as advice, because it's like, how do you know that you're doing this unless someone tells you? And at the same time, if one person tells you that you are and one person tells you you're not, then it comes down to subjectivity. And at that point, I would just say write how you write. And if it becomes a problem, then you're probably going to find out, because either you're not going to have sales, you're not going to get an agent, you're not going to, etc. Something is going to go wrong unless you're just writing for yourself. But I definitely agree with the dishonest part. Like, I don't think you should, like, especially if you're writing, like, memoirs or nonfiction books or self-help, like, you should never be dishonest in that sense, because if your goal is to help people or get your point across and then you're lying, you're just going to have a lot more problems in your life than you have now, essentially. But yeah, I just don't know. Like, I can't really say I agree or disagree, because as I said, I've definitely read books where I felt the author's intent was a bit pretentious, but that's my opinion. So I don't necessarily think this is just solid advice for anyone. I mean, sure, it's good to say, don't be pretentious, don't be exhibitionist. Even abstract. I mean, like, sometimes it's good to be abstract. Again, it depends on what you're going for, guys. So, yeah, I just don't think that's good advice. 5 is create a believable setting or landscape, one you know well, one you can describe and make the reader see and believe. Again, I don't think this is true. It goes back to the one you know well. I think a lot of writers, they take a lot of stuff based on their own experiences, and then they twist it into something else. The novel that I want to start working on has a lot of dream landscapes. So I am taking ideas from, like, movies and TV shows and other books of, like, that inspiration to kind of paint my own picture, but it's still mine and it's still creative. And yes, it's influenced in certain ways, but it's still not going to be something that I've lived in, because it's a dream world. So I think it's hard to tell people that, again, just because anyone can, you can watch a TV or read books and you can end up being a really, really good writer on some place that you haven't been to. Of course, it's always better if you can go. I mean, when I wrote my historic fiction about Salem, like, I pulled a lot of inspiration from where I've been to, and I loved that. But if, sometimes that's inaccessible to people, so there's a whole internet, and that's why I'm saying I think this was an older guy, because he's so stuck in his ways. We have the internet at our fingertips now, and if you could type it on an internet and Google it and YouTube it, then you kind of can experience it. So we have much more of an advantage than we did 100 years ago, that's for sure. Number 6, this one is always classic, show rather than tell. That is, do not say a character, she hated Jack or loved Jack, which is telling. Have her throw a cup at John, or have her wrap her arms around him, which is showing. I love that first of all, they changed his name midway through sentence. We have hated Jack or loved Jack, and then threw a cup at John. All right, but I agree with this one. This is hard and true. It's definitely better to always show and be descriptive in your work rather than just telling readers what's going on, because you're not going to be able to connect to readers. There's obviously a time and place where telling them something briefly is simple. And I actually just read, reading a book, it was something like, being in the city made her anxious. So that's telling, but then she still followed up with, like, a description of, like, like the noises and the crowds made her feel, like, very small, and, like, it was still kind of descriptive in that sense. And sometimes too, when you're trying to convey a lot in a little, telling can be appropriate. But as always, this is a pretty solid rule of writing, is you should always practice showing more than telling. This one, I don't even know. So number 7 is try to use an effective title and not something tacked on. Well, no shit. I mean, I think that's like, as writers, like, we always want to make titles that are conveying whatever work we're writing. And titles are really, really hard. But, like, what? I don't understand. Like, well, how do we know if it's tacked on? Like, I mean, personally, the titles that I've been working with for all of my stories that I've been writing, they took me weeks to even come up with, and I'm still doubting them. So it wasn't like it was tacked on, but I'm sure anyone can point a finger and say, yeah, this doesn't sound really good. So again, I think that's a very subjective piece of advice again. And I mean, sure, I've, like, you know, my Project Hope, that's a placeholder. That is a tacked on title right now, but that's a placeholder. Obviously, like, I want to change that, but I don't know. I mean, clearly put some thought into your titles, guys. I guess that would be the advice. And if that's the case, I agree, but it's just a weird way of writing that. Number 8. I feel like this is repetitive. Try not to be obscure, vague, or dishonest in your story or poem. Be as clear, specific, and direct as you can. This, I feel like that's repetitive. Of course, like, although, again, unless your intention is to be vague and obscure, yeah, you should be straightforward, but yeah, I got nothing. This was repetitive. Number 9 is a doozy. Remember that just because you have had what you feel is a great experience, it might not appear so when you write it down. It has to become fiction or poetry. It has to be imaginatively transformed. Do not write your biography and expect it to be a good piece of writing. Most of us lead dull lives. This is why we have fiction, to make ordinary extraordinary, the dull exciting. So, yeah, this is true, I think, for biography. And I know I've seen other advice on YouTube and talking with writers. This is pretty much true. Like, if you know, everyone's story is their own, but it's not always interesting to other people. So if you're thinking of writing a memoir, an autobiography, etc., it might be a hard sell, and it's hard to have your life rejected by people. So I definitely agree that you know, you should just be cautious going into that. Although this is kind of flippant, because it's just like, your life is boring, so don't write about it. That's not necessarily true. I mean, there's memoirs and autobiographies that get published all the time, and not always by celebrities. So you can still write a really good book and make it poetic and crafty, and it be true. So that's kind of, you know, discrediting all the memoirs out there. The other part of this, though, too, is, yes, you definitely, I mean, even like the dullest experiences, good writers can transform that. So I definitely don't want that advice to kind of take away from people's creativity and their talent, because I think, you know, falling out of a tree and breaking your leg doesn't sound that great. But if you can weave me a story of like this great adventure in this child's head where they were like going up the mountain to slay the dragon, and when they fell out of the tree and broke their leg, you know, it was the dragon snickering over them. But in reality, you know, so that went from a boring true story to like this imaginative, like, this is what I was doing when I was playing at 6 years old. And I felt like, I thought it was like, you know, my lost battle with the dragon, but in reality, it was just my broken leg. You can do so many crazy things. And even if you didn't want to take that imaginative speculation from it, you could still weave like a very interesting, mundane thing into a really good story. So yeah, I'm kind of middle of the line with that piece of advice, because I think there is some truth to it, but not in every case again. So number 10 is TOO. T-O-O. You might consider that in a piece of writing, some sort of trouble is more interesting than lack of trouble. Some sort of conflict is necessary. Happy endings are an easy way out. Okay. I get it. Yes, I do. This is the weird, it's worded so strangely, but yes, this is exactly, I agree with this. Essentially, when you're writing a novel and we're talking about that arc, you need kind of like, so you have like the beginning of the story, and then you have the rising action, you hit the climax, then you have the denouement. Like, definitely that, but that's what makes a good story, and most stories should have that in some capacity. And even if you're writing novels in a series, every series should still kind of have that, because if you don't have a conflict in a story, you're not going to be able to really have a story. And the conflict doesn't have to be like actual conflict, but it could be an internal conflict from a character of like, you know, deciding whether or not they should go to a private boarding school and leave all their friends, or, you know, stay in public school but maybe not get the education that they wanted. Or it could be, you know, with like adoption stories of, you know, I thought I could get pregnant, but there's adoption here at me. Or, you know, like, can I get over the fact that they're not going to be my biological kid? That's kind of internal conflict because there's nothing really happening outside of them. It's just something that they're struggling with. There's external conflict. Clearly, you know, we have tons of fantasy with external conflict where you're, you know, you're on a quest for something and there's all these obstacles in the way. Or if you don't get the quest done, then the world is going to go into chaos. That is conflict, and that is going to be what drives your story. So even though that was a really weirdly worded piece of advice, I 100% agree with that. I think you need conflict, or else people or editors and agents are going to kind of read your work and go, but why? Why is this happening? Where's the driving force behind it? Number 11, and this. We are daily bombarded by thoughtless language, dull language, language that lies to us, language that does not uplift. This is the language of politics, advertisement, television, etc. The language that numbs us, that offers us no provocation to consider our complicated selves or our complicated world. To write. You have to write in a way that gives real meaning to the strangest of our lives. I think this is very repetitive. Pretty much the same thing in this one that he already said. It just kind of summarizes this, that yes, you need to make your writing interesting. If you are having a book that just reads, the cat was fat, the fat was covered by fur, the fur jingled when the cat walked. I liked to pet the cat, but the cat did not like me. You know, that's boring. But you can spice it up more and have like this creative story of, you know, when I first saw the cat jingling down the stairs, its fur flying which way, and I couldn't tell where the fur started and the flubber began. It's more creative. So yes, you need to be creative if you're going to write. Otherwise, it is going to be dull and people aren't going to want to read your work. And the last one, which is, it did not fit on this page. Also, it looks like it was done on like WordPad. This is clearly so old, but the last one, the poet Czesław Miloszów, I messed it. It's Czesław Milosz, refers to the passionate pursuit of the real. The real he refers to is, I believe, what is covered up by the sort of language that is mentioned in number 11. It's so hard now that I've been like doing writing for so long that like that line sounds so pretentious. Like, I literally read through all of this for you to be so repetitive at the end, to quote a famous poet by saying passionate pursuit of the real, and then just say, go back and read number 11 to understand this. One piece of advice that's not on here is trust your readers to know what you're talking about. You don't have to be quoting people and then tell them to go read everything else again. Like, you should just know, like, if they've read it, then they should know what you're talking about. But yeah, again, pursuit of the real. I mean, I think this is even with fantasy and science fiction. You want to have, you know, certain amounts of belief in every story you're written. Because if it's too far-fetched, if it's too out of left field, people are going to be disconnected to it. And even in fantasy, I know that, like, there's some grounding of normalcy, unless your intention is to write a story so absolutely absurd and that's your goal. If you're writing a fantasy novel and, like, you don't explain things well enough, or it kind of comes out of nowhere and it's like, well, is this a rule of magic? Is this part of the world? Like, what is going on? You're going to lose your readers a little bit. And I've noticed that quite a bit in even fantasy books that I like, that sometimes I get hung up on things that don't make sense to me. So again, trust your readers to know what you're talking about, but also make sure that you're filling in some of that real life knowledge, like anchor it. Even if you have to, you know, do a little bit of background information or explanation in some kind of way, your readers will understand it if you give that to them. So all in all, that's the tea. No, but I hope you enjoyed this like fun little video. Like I said, I'm gonna go burn this now because I don't think people should be reading this ever again. While I think there was some really good points that this professor had, I just think in this day and age, it is kind of nonsense to assume that people can't write good things if they have no form or access of knowledge. I think we have so much Google and YouTube and people traveling more, and you also have people's interest. I mean, you don't write things if you're not interested in them. I didn't write a story set in historic Salem because I had no interest in it. Because I took that interest, I did my research, I've been to there in real life. I included a lot of my own experiences being in those towns and seeing what I've learned and all that kind of stuff. And I put my passion into that short story. So if I wasn't interested in it, so say for instance, you know, I was told, okay, you're going to write a story on the Civil War. It would be a terrible story because I hate learning about the Civil War. I don't like it. I don't want to learn about it. And sure, there's probably some knowledge in there, but it's not going to be good. I didn't live there. I don't care about doing the research, and it will sound dull and mundane because I'm going to make it dull and mundane. But you always kind of find where your passions are, and that's what writers write about. So I think at the end of the day, if you do the work that you need to do, you get better, you practice, you put your work out into the world by beta readers and, you know, critique partners, and you keep trying to do what you need to do to be better, then you might have a better chance. But going off of everyone's advice isn't always going to be solid. I think, you know, learning is a process for everyone, and one person's advice isn't going to be the same for you. And it might not, the way that you work as a writer might not be the same for me or for anyone else. So it's all about learning and crafting your own process. And while this could be a good starting point for you, I wouldn't let it dictate everything you do. So thanks for coming to my ramble, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down below if you agree with any of this advice, or if you follow more so with me and how I look at that advice. Do you think there is some merit to, you know, my old professor's way of writing, or do you think that it is kind of a little bit old school and we can move past this nowadays? And what do you think? Is he pretentious, or is it just me? Otherwise, guys, I look forward to having some discussions down in the comments with you, and until I come back next time, see you then. Bye.